Working. How's this for being on time? I've got exactly 2 o'clock. And you know who's out there. So, I'm Mike Wasowski. I'm the state campaign chairman, and I'm very privileged and honored to do this. My wife and I, we were in Myrtle Beach this weekend, a very special weekend, and I'm sure Dr. Paul will expound on what happened there. The last time Dr. Paul was in Spartanburg, that was his visit where he got the famous 89 seconds to speak, right? He's going to get all he wants tonight, or this afternoon, all he wants. Thank y'all for coming out on a Tuesday afternoon and nearly filling this room. That is fantastic. Thank y'all for doing it. In the debate last night, I don't know who saw it or not, there was some booing, and it was some booing in response to the golden rule. So I'm going to read this for the record from Matthew chapter 7, verse 12. So in everything, do to others what you would have them do to you. For this sums up the law and the prophets. Again, thank you all very much for coming, and here is our modern day founding father and champion of the Constitution, Dr. Ron Paul.
For a day or two, so we're very pleased to see such a nice turnout. And the enthusiasm as well. The enthusiasm is building, if you haven't noticed. Things are going along real well. You know, we scored some points out in Iowa, did even better in New Hampshire. We expect to do very well on Saturday. Yeah! A whole lot because I know and you know that our message is a little bit different than the others, and we are determined to bring about some changes that we see very necessary and very beneficial to our country. And it's not just to promote the status quo and tinker around the edges, and it's not to provide a candidate that is not a whole lot different than the other side. You know, over the years I've been involved in politics, about 20, 30 years, one of the reasons I became frustrated over the whole process was that we would have, the rhetoric would be different. Republicans could say one thing, and that's why we generally follow the Republican Party, and they would be more conservative. But then when they get in office, they haven't done a heck of a lot. Have you ever noticed that? And then, and even on the other side, Democrats will get in, and they're supposed to give us less government in certain areas and maybe bring some of those troops home, but nothing really ever changes. So there have been many who have come to the conclusion that at the national level our parties aren't a whole lot different. But we are determined that we will have a different, not only a different platform and different message, but in office we will have a different type of government. Yeah! We don't have to invent it. There's been a lot of people in prior years that have helped us define what we should have in a free society and in a true republic. The founders did this. They fought a revolution. They wrote a constitution and did a pretty good job. But they also warned us at the time, you know, that if the people don't stand up and have moral character and even religious beliefs, the republic doesn't work. If it drifts away from a republic and into a pure democracy, John Adams also said that society eventually murders itself. And he used those words. And in a way, I feel is what we do to ourselves. Sometimes the spending, and all with the pretense of doing good, but we're ruining our economy. We have ourselves so stretched around the world. Our debt is exploding, and there's no signs that we're doing anything about it. There are no real cuts proposed in Washington. A little bit of rhetoric here or there. We go to super committees and then we ignore them. And tomorrow we will be voting in the House on trying to prevent the national debt from being increased over another $1 trillion. And it's all been a gimmick because, you know, last summer when they couldn't get the debt limit passed, they had to come up with a gimmick. And the gimmick was a super committee. They had to resolve it. If they couldn't resolve it, the cuts would be on $1.4 trillion, automatic in place. So that passed, but they also changed it and said that if the president needs a more increase in the national debt, all he has to do is make a request. That sounds easy. That's the way it's been for a long time. But in this case, if the Congress doesn't vote it down, it automatically goes into effect. So it's automatic unless the Congress rescinds it. So it's different. The president legislates and we get a chance to maybe veto it. The whole problem is, if we tomorrow vote this down and not grant, let's say we vote to prevent the national debt from going up, he can veto the bill. So it is such a mess. And I see the mess that we have today is that we as a country have come to a conclusion that the role of government is a lot different than what was intended. The role of government in our Constitution is precise. One of the top priorities in our Constitution is to have a very strong national defense. And of course, I think if you spend too much money doing the wrong things and getting into trouble, that's not necessary national defense. Just because you spend money in a certain area doesn't mean you're going to get more of it. Sometimes you get just more debt and more spending and more special interest spending. So the other things that the Constitution, the founders wanted was, they did want a sound currency. They understood the runaway inflation of the continental dollar. So they said, we got to clean that mess up. The colonies weren't doing, the Confederation wasn't doing well, so what they wanted was a sound currency. So they said, the Congress, nobody else has the authority to print money. Now, wouldn't that be a novelty in this country? That would also mean there would be a Federal Reserve System, too. Silver were to be a legal tender, and the reason for this is very practical. It's not complex. They like to tell you, oh, that monetary system, the Federal Reserve, is too complex. Well, it really isn't. When the Congress and the politicians spend money to buy votes, if they don't have enough money through collection of taxes and borrowing, they print it. It's no more complicated from that, and it's not hard to figure that if somebody in secret can print money at will to satisfy those who spend money and run up deficits, guess what? The value of that money goes down. Now, is that really complex or is that pretty straightforward? I think it's pretty straightforward. Instead of following the Constitution, which was to restrain the federal government, we have forgotten about that. It was meant to really put strict controls on the federal government, but there were to be no restraints on you, on the people. It was to make sure that you had your freedoms, your individual liberty, your privacy, and the government off your backs and out of your wallets. And yet, just look at what's happening today. Whether you talk about the Patriot Act, I don't even think we need the Patriot Act. We don't need that. This bill, Stop Online Privacy Act. We don't need the federal government taking over our computers and the internet. The Patriot Act essentially repealed the Fourth Amendment. It means that the government can come in and look at anything they want in our houses, on our internet, our phones, and everything else. And if they come into our houses and we're aware of it, and you're aware that the federal government came in and searched in your house and didn't do anything more than search, just the fact that they did it, and you tell somebody else, becomes a felony. You're not allowed to even tell your attorney, your preacher, or your wife, technically speaking, that they were in there looking around and maybe taking something, but the federal government comes in and said, no, you can't even tell anybody. But just recently, you know, it came up last night, and I got to comment on it a little bit, and that's the National Defense Authorization Act. Of course, there's some good spending in the Defense Authorization Act, but they also put some bad things in these bills. And my rule over the many decades has been, don't give in to the bad stuff just because they have some good stuff in there. That's how they erode the Constitution. But the provision put in here a couple of weeks ago is really bad. You know, I mentioned last night very briefly, because at the time I said one of the bad things that happened during the last 10 years has been the change in attitude when we go to war. First, we don't declare war anymore, which is pretty bad. That's what the founders gave us in our Constitution. They knew we had to have a national defense. They knew we might have to go to war. But up until World War II, we declared the war, and it was short-lived, and we all got together, we fought and won. But now, we go to war, but not only do we go to war without a declaration, it's terrible. We go to war under NATO and United Nations. We should never go to war under an international government. They have gone one step further, and there was always the pretense it was defense. You know, they're attacking us. In World War II, there were flaws in our system, but they attacked us. They declared war against it. It was pretty cut and dry. But now, the new doctrine is that we can and should, matter of fact, the policy is we should go to war because they might do something to us someday. It's called preemptive war. Other people call it aggression. And it's terrible to have to call attention to this, but it's the truth. And we shouldn't be doing this. And two reasons if they'll go to war and to start the war. One is maybe they'll do harm to us someday, which is we ought to keep an eye on them. But the other thing is we go to war now because we want to change their government and mold their government and change their way of living. I mean, what makes us think, even if we are, for many reasons, an exceptional nation, what gives us the right to believe that we can take our exceptionalism and force it on somebody else? That undermines our exceptionalism. We have been doing that. We're getting ourselves into a lot of trouble. We spend a lot of money, and I think we do not lose one thing. Had a little debate with this last night with one of the interviewers, that every time you spend more money in the military, it doesn't mean you're spending more money on defense. Sometimes it's almost the opposite of that. Eisenhower warned us about this. Maybe the contractors will have more influence than you have on when we go to war. It's one of the reasons why I think we get so much support from the military personnel, because they know what's going on. They've been over there, and I am very pleased that we get more, like twice as much as all the other candidates together from active duty military. We should never ignore the threats. That's the purpose of the government, to protect us. So if somebody's planning and we can find out, we should do something about it. But this whole thing that if we overdo it, now there's actually a pretty strong movement in Washington around the country today, although more people are starting to speak out against this. And they think we need to invade Iran. and bombing on and start a war, which makes no sense at all. They can't even make enough gasoline for themselves. And the evidence actually is very, very good. According to even our CIA and Secretary Panetta, he says that they're not on the verge of it. The UN inspectors say the same thing. So we ought to, I think the greatest danger is overreacting. But we were able to contain the Soviets. They had 30,000 nuclear weapons during the period of time I was in the Air Force. We had to contain them. And finally, they bankrupted themselves. They were foolish enough to invade Afghanistan. We couldn't imagine such a thing. Is the answer to the Soviets actually turned out to be have a little common sense conversation. I was called to duty in October. That's when I received my draft notice. And that was the month of October '62 when the missile crisis occurred in Cuba. And it ended up Kennedy actually talked to Khrushchev, and they had agreement. All right, you take those missiles out of Cuba, and we'll take them out of Turkey. Which sounds like a pretty sensible resolution to that. So we shouldn't be frightened about talking to people. I say, well, some of these people you want to talk to aren't really nice people. Yeah, but do you think Khrushchev was a nice person? And look at how much negotiation we did with the Soviets as well as the Chinese when they were ruthless, killing hundreds of millions of their own people. We still saw it was in our best interest. So that is what I'm trying to do, is to tell people that we don't have to shoot from the hip and have a strong national defense, be reserved at it, and contain people if they provide a threat to us. But, when we take our oath of office, we swear to uphold the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. I am convinced, having been in the military, know a little bit about what's going on in the military, I'm convinced our military is in good shape, very good shape, and we're not. I don't think we have to be frightened that we can't take care of ourselves. And at home, Patriot Act and these other things, and attack on our privacy and attack on the internet. But on this National Defense Appropriation Act, this is the one where they now have literally put into law, codified the power of the president to arrest any American citizen he deems as a threat. He deems as a threat, even just associated with the group that might be a threat. And they can arrest someone.
George Orwell!
By the military. The military can arrest an American citizen. American citizen can be held indefinitely, which means forever if they want, and denied an attorney. Why are we so frightened about using the court system? Sure, there must be some that you have to, but why not arrest them and take them to court? They say, no, you have to haul them up. They are so dangerous. We have to put them in a secret prison, torture them, and do all these other things. But since 9/11, I think this is a very important number. We have arrested 372 individuals, and they're in prison. 260 of them have been convicted through our regular court system. I mean, this whole idea that they want to sacrifice the court system and be able to arrest anybody anytime they want because you might be so dangerous. I mean, some of the comments last night were actually frightening to me because, oh, they're criminals, they're terrorists, and therefore we put them in prison. No, in America, we might be suspects, but we're not terrorists. And even if it's a bad guy, you want him to get the due process. Because that's what we want. That's what the revolution was fought for. If we give up that, we give up a big hunk of what has made America. The economy obviously is the big issue. But you can't talk about any part of the system without talking about the deficit. We need to take a hold of the deficit. That's why our economy is in shambles. All we can do now is pay interest on the debt. We're working hard. We don't have the jobs. We had a 30 million increase in population in the past 10 years, and are essentially no new jobs. So there's a lot of underemployment and unemployment. And this is why the expenditures go up, and the income does not go up, and something has to be done. My modest suggestion is in the first year, cut $1 trillion out of it and spend it. The plan that we have written up is written cautiously. It doesn't solve all the unconstitutional things we do, but we do pick priorities. And there are many priorities that we can cut. I think there's so much overseas spending, we should address that. There are departments that we should cut. We should go back a couple years on the budget levels. And actually we can do this with not going after Social Security and medical care benefits, if you want to put that a top priority. Because people have been taught about how do you get out of it. Let's say we want to be idealistic and we want private medicine for everybody, which is a nice goal. But how could we do that when the government's now involved in 75% of the delivery of health care? And it's getting worse. So this is why I try to preserve that and hopefully work our way out of it. When we do that, balance the budget and invite people to opt out of the system rather than dragging everybody into the system, that's what we don't need. More people. Very clear in our Constitution and in our traditions that life and liberty comes to us from our Creator, and it's very important. I think life is precious. As an OB doctor, I know it's precious. I know that unborn life has legal value to it, and that if we ignore that, if we're careless with the definition of life, believe me, it becomes more difficult to defend liberty. Because I am an arch champion of individual liberty to allow people to run their lives as they see fit. But I do not believe I can make the case for it if I say some life isn't very precious and we can do away with it out of convenience. So there's a big difference from that. So life and liberty is key. And if we do that, and you do have your freedoms and you have your incentives to take care of yourselves, you have to have the right to keep what you earn. If the government's taking 30, 40, 50% and they regulate you to death and they tell you how to use your property, today you might have, or not might, to build a house or to close in a ditch someplace, you might have to check with the EPA and all other kind of people and get rules and regulations. So we have lost our true right to own our property. We should defend the right to keep what you earn. If that were the case, you would not have an income tax at all. When they hear me talk and they know I'm firm on my beliefs, they say, it won't work because you're not willing to compromise. And I say, well, that's what we've been doing. We probably had way too much compromise in too many decades. That doesn't mean you write people off. What you need, I believe we all need, is the understanding of how a free society works. Because freedom brings people together. Everybody wants their freedom to run their own life as they choose. We understand this in religion. Everybody has different religions, but we should respect these religious values. And if we recognize that freedom brings people together, both in the social sense, but also in the economic sense. You know, you should have the freedom to spend your money. That doesn't mean everybody's going to spend their money the same way. Some will be savers and some will sort of spend it all. But in a free society, they get to make the choice. So in many ways, it brings people together, and it's coalition building. Even today, the things that I stand for, I think there was a poll just came out yesterday, that if there's a national poll today with me running against Obama, it's essentially even. So there's a lot of... with following the Constitution, understanding liberty by bringing people together for different reasons. That to me is so much better than getting together and saying, oh, this group wants to spend money on this, and this group wants to spend on this, so we'll get together, we'll spend it together, and then we'll print the money and everybody's going to be happy until the whole thing comes down our head. And it's coming down on our heads. We're in the middle of that. This is why it's serious business. This is why we need to do something. And there's reasons to be optimistic about this because the country is changing. And the first thing that has to happen before you have the change necessary to go back to a republic is the recognition that we're in trouble. And the American people are, let me tell you, I talk to a lot of young people. And and they know what's going on, they know what they're getting, and they're very open to the ideas of liberty. So there's reason to believe that there's a remnant of people out there that have been thinking along these lines and just need a little encouragement, and we also have the young people joining us. So we do have a grand coalition, and I believe very sincerely that we can change this country back to the republic we deserve. Thank you.